Craig O'Boyle with the O'Boyle Real Estate Group coming to you with another episode of the Real Estate Shed Show. Today is April 5th, 2022. I am back in my shed to do a little mountain bike maintenance here for the upcoming riding season, and I thought I'd go over a couple of topics with you. My three topics for the day are: number one, the current economy and where we're at in that; number two, the current Colorado Springs real estate housing market; and number three, what it all means to you from my perspective. So sit back and enjoy. To start talking about the economy, I feel like you have to talk about government debt and spending. Well, currently as of April 5th, 2022, we are $30.3 trillion in debt. Since 2005, that's an increase of over $22.5 trillion. So it really kicked off, the government printing of money kicked off with the financial crisis in 2008. So between 2008 and April of 2020, government debt increased by $14.3 trillion. Then along came the pandemic. In April of 2020, the pandemic really took hold. And since then, over 2 years, we've increased national debt by another $6.6 trillion. So $30.5 trillion or $30.3 trillion of debt. Wow, that's a big number. Let's give it some perspective here, though. To get to that number, you would have to spend $41.5 million per day for 2,000 years to spend $30.5 trillion. That's just absolutely ridiculous, and it has some consequences. Now let's talk about inflation, which is currently running at 8%. Well, why? Well, our government has flooded the economy with cheap, low-interest money. The economy is artificially restrained with lockdowns that shut down supply chains. The flood of government cash is used to buy everything from stocks to real estate to bicycles to whatever is not nailed down effectively. Because cash really never likes to sit idle. It's always looking for a place to go. Well, now when the lockdowns end and things loosen up, supply chains for raw materials, for goods, for services, for all sorts of things have so much demand added to them that they can't keep up, and prices continue to skyrocket. There is also very little incentive for prices to go down because, like I said, the government has ejected so much cash out there that somebody is willing to pay the higher costs to keep things going. It's like a vicious cycle. In order to fight inflation, what is the government's main task or tool? Well, the Federal Reserve is raising the Fed funds rate. And we expect to see that raised aggressively in 2022. The purpose of them raising the Fed funds rate, truthfully, is to put a wet blanket on the economy, to try and slow it down, to reduce demand in lots of areas so that prices can ease or potentially go down. So that's the Fed's tool right now. The stock market topped out at just about 37,000 in the Dow. It's currently, I think, running about 2,000 as of today below that. And that's because a lot of investors are starting to see that the Fed's going to get aggressive to fight these problems that we have in the economy. There is one bright side of the economy that we currently have, and that is the job market. We're really running at full employment. And I think we have something like 5 million unfilled jobs and lots of job creation. But I think that could be primarily in sectors that will ultimately be the most vulnerable to the Fed's actions, things like the travel and leisure sector or the entertainment sector and those types of things. To add one more piece on top of some of the craziness that we have right now, we have a political issue in Europe with the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is adding to inflation issues, especially in the energy markets by reduced supply from Russia for gas and for oil, And I think it's also going to add quite a bit of inflation to the food market, since Ukraine is a huge supplier of wheat and foodstuffs. So, putting it all together, we have an economy with some serious challenges right now. Now let's talk about the current Colorado Springs housing market. As of the end of February 2022, our average house price in Colorado Springs was $515,000, and our median sales price, which is the exact midpoint between high and low, was $465,000. Currently, mortgage interest rates have risen from the ultimate mid-pandemic lows of sub 3% to around 4.5% to 4.75%, according to my lender. So where are we going in this housing market? Let's talk, first of all, about demand. House prices are based on supply and demand, but let's talk about demand. Currently in the United States, more than 50% of the population was born after the year 1980. Not myself, I was born before then, but so I guess I'm the old man here. But only a small portion of the population that was born after 1980 currently owns its own home. But that population is going to rapidly come of age into the ideal home buying time frame. So there is going to be an increase in demand for housing. Now, values to the levels that we talked about earlier, which we're currently at, have risen because of those demographics that I'm talking about, but also because of all of the money that has been pushed out into the marketplace by the government. Currently, we are seeing massive investment into real estate assets by not only small individual investors, someone like myself and people I work with, but large Wall Street firms that are buying up thousands of single-family properties across the country. And that is simply because they have cash on hand, and cash is always looking for a place to earn a return. And real estate in a high inflation climate is a very strong hedge against inflation because it is a hard asset. So everyone wants to know, how do prices come down? Well, home prices are based on simply the supply and demand economics. If the supply of homes exceeds the demand for homes, prices will fall. Currently, we have expensive homes and we have rising mortgage rates. This is a double whammy that affects entry-level buyers first and then moves up to the higher-end buyers last. But because we have a high level of base aggregate demand for housing in the economy, because of the demographics that were discussed earlier, it's difficult to really see enough of a drop in demand to do much except maybe flatten the rates of appreciation that we have seen to more reasonable and normal levels. If the market cools off, however, people who stepped aside at a high price or because of high costs or because of high competition will simply immediately jump right back into the market with any kind of pullback that we may get. So I don't think that this is what's going to push demand down. So let's talk about housing supply. Before the 2008 housing crash, we were building somewhere between 25 and 27 million homes per decade to keep up with demographics and housing demand. When the crash happened, we halted to about less than 6 million homes built in the decade following the 2008 crash. Couple that with the demographics we talked about, all the people coming into the age of buying their first home and home ownership, coupled with all the free money that drove Wall Street into buying homes, that's what's created the perfect storm for values to do what they have done in the last 7 years, especially in the last 3 to 5. It's absolutely skyrocketed. And I don't see that is going to end anytime soon. Now let's talk about the housing market locally. Sticker shock from higher prices combined with a reduction in buying power from higher interest rates is going to start pulling more and more buyers out of the market. It's already started. It will start at the entry-level buyer and it will move upward. This will likely slow the pace of appreciation somewhat, perhaps even flatten out the rate of appreciation for a time. But because of the aggregate demand being high for housing with all the demographic stuff we've talked about, I really don't see a sustainable pullback in pricing. If anything, I see us returning to more of a normal market. However, there is one big caveat that could throw all of my conclusions or my thoughts out with regards to the local housing market, and that is jobs. If we see job losses accelerate across a larger and a larger section of the economy, really all bets are off. People by and large will do everything they can to stay in their home, especially if they bought their home or they refinanced their home to a rate below 4%, right? It's hard to find anything cheaper to live in, and housing is a basic necessity. So people will sacrifice buying that new car, taking that vacation, eating out at restaurants, doing a lot of things. But if continued or rising unemployment persists long term, foreclosure may become inevitable. And if, like before, we get a huge rise in foreclosures, well, we would go back to the 2008 to 12 trajectory. Now, if your time horizon is long enough, meaning you don't have to liquidate your home or you're not foreclosed upon, I mean, gosh, if you weathered that storm in 2008, you've really done well just by staying in your own property. So I think ultimately, though, the aggregate demand with the demographics is such that I really don't expect any downturn to be persistent over a long time that drops prices to really low levels. Now, if you're thinking about or have motivation to be a seller, my opinion is the earlier in 2022 that you sell, the better. The market is still producing bidding wars over the list price. This may not continue, which also isn't necessarily terrible, but instead of possibly getting thousands over the list price, you may just get the list price, or if you're overly aggressive on your pricing, you might get slightly under your list price. Once again, still not terrible with all the appreciation we've seen. The longer you wait, the more damage inflation and the Fed rate increases are going to do and are going to affect the overall economy and your pool of buyers. So while that may mean that you don't end up selling to multiple offers over list, I do expect that you'll still do well selling your home. But I think now is the time if you're really thinking about it. If you're a buyer in this market, the pain of bidding wars may start to ease, but unfortunately the pain of higher payments will not because interest rates are rising. The truth is if you're a first timer, you're really caught in a tight spot because you don't already own a home. First, you don't have the equity gains that can be used as down payment on a new home, and your buying power is diminished by higher rates. I think it's critical for you first timers, though, to get into a home as fast as possible because no matter what, you've got to live somewhere. You might as well be paying on your own mortgage for your own property than paying on something for a landlord. For you move-up buyers who have something to sell and equity to take with you, you're in a much better spot, truthfully. You can be selective in finding the right home and the right situation, and especially if the move isn't urgent. In some cases, if the move is urgent, it actually may make sense once you sell your home to rent for a period of time so you don't find yourself in a crunch to get the right situation or the right deal. You can take your time to find the right thing. To sum it all up, change is afoot in the economy and in the housing market. Whenever possible, live in something that you own. Provide a solid example, hopefully, to our government by keeping your debt as low as possible. And call me whenever your friends, your family or you need any real estate help. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Craig O'Boyle, O'Boyle Real Estate Group, 719-576-7373. Have a great day.